Okay, so welcome everyone to our Growing Resilience webinar series, which is a joint undertaking of Cornell Cooperative Extension, Delaware County, and Cornell Cooperative Extension in Orange County. My name is Julika von Stackelberg. I am the Family and Community Resilience Educator at Cornell Cooperative Extension in Orange County. And I am delighted to be here with you. Just to give you a quick background to where this is coming from, for the past year, we have been holding this webinar series with topics that relate to how we can contribute to and grow resilience in our community. The webinars are all recorded and they are available for you to go back to if you're interested, as this one today will also be recorded and added to our library, so to speak. So before I introduce today's topic, I just want to give you a quick heads up of upcoming events and also thank my colleagues here in Orange County, Susie McCormick and Caitlin O'Brien, who are also here with us, as well as Ginny Darling, who's the executive director in Delaware County, and Karen Graves, who've been helping us to get the word out about this webinar series. So I'm excited to tell you that we are all set for our next Making Healthful Decisions conference, which will be taking place in December, on December 7 and 8. And I will put the link here in the chat so you can see this. The conference will talk about youth mental health, well-being, and growth after 2020. And will feature a fantastic keynote presentation on the neuro. Oh, I forgot the title. So now you have to click. You have to click the link in the chat to look it up for yourself. So that you can see it. There's also going to be a very dynamic panel discussion that will be hosted by a sophomore student from Warwick in Orange County, who's located currently in California at college. So we will hear the voices of young people represented in the conference. And then there is a whole slew of workshops that are available. Many of them take place simultaneously. So we make sure that you register for any one of them and you will receive the recordings of all the others as well that you can then go through when you have the time. So we invite you to join us for that. And then also heads up, next year, which is just around the corner, I can't even believe it, we will continue this webinar series thanks to the support from the ACES task force in Delaware County and also in collaboration with the CCE Delaware County again. And we have some very special guests there that are going to join us and offer presentations. We will hold these again from January until May on every second Thursday of the month from 3:30 to 4:30, with the exception of the second one in February. That will be with special guest, Dr. Ken Ginsberg, who many of you probably have heard or read about, who talks about youth and resilience as well. And he will join us on the 3rd of February. So that will be the first Thursday of that month. And I think that's all the upcoming events. Please, stay in touch with us. There will be a brief survey at the end of this webinar, and we hope that you will fill that out and let us know. There will also be an opportunity there to for you to put your contact information if you're interested in any specific projects or in the resilience work that we are doing across the state. So now I am very excited to introduce you to Sophia Irquiola, who is a student at Cornell University. She's a senior with a major in human development and a minors in Spanish and law and society. Wonderful mix. And she's a research assistant in the Early Childhood Cognition Lab and a scholar in PRIDE. And PRIDE stands for Program for Research on Youth Development and Engagement, and a Manning Family Cornell National Scholars Program member. She's also the vice president of programming of Cornell's branch of College of Mentors for Kids, where she supervises about 30 children and their mentors, witnessing firsthand the impact of mentoring in the lives of children. As a researcher, she strives to ensure that frequently overlooked children are accounted for and investigate that their needs are investigated and not neglected in our community. She hopes to continue her education in social work and psychology, and in the future, she strives to learn about those who feel powerless so she may help them find their voices. Sophia, we're very excited to be here. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Yulika, for introducing me. Like Yulika said, my name is Sophia Urquiola, and I'm just so happy to be here today. So just to say a bit more about myself, I'm currently applying to Master's in Social Work programs with plans to delve deeper into youth development, family systems, and just to better understand multiple sources of injustice. And I feel so honored to be presenting my work from the Early Childhood Cognition Lab, and want to especially thank Yulika for making this possible. And I know she's going to monitor the chat for me. She's basically like the tech connoisseur here. So while there will be space for questions at multiple points, I'm very open to answering questions along the way. So again, welcome and thank you. And I'm here with you today because, again, my work as an undergraduate student researcher in the Early Childhood Cognition Lab, working under Dr. Tamar Kushnir. My team and I have been working on understanding the impact of COVID-19 on youth ages 7 to 11, basically since the pandemic started. So we began recruitment in the summer of 2020, interviewing kids about their experiences, and we interviewed them again about 5 to 6 months later to see how their experiences had changed. Before I go into more details, I really want to get to know a bit more about you all. So for the next couple of minutes, I'd love for you to type in the chat your name and your profession, and maybe why you joined this webinar. So I'll also look at the chat. You know, it's tough to connect over Zoom sometimes. So, and I'm really excited to see what you all do and why you chose to join. I'll wait for the chat a little, no worries. I know people are typing. I also want to say thank you to Susie and Caitlin for being here. The reason I know Yulika is because I was able to work with Parenting a Second Time Around and Project 2Gen in this past summer as an intern, developing a program to make that curriculum really extend it to kids and youth in kinship families. So it's really great to reconnect with everybody. Let's see, Kathleen is a social worker, consultant to schools and municipalities as well as private practice. That's awesome. Caitlin, I know, Relatives and Parents Program Coordinator. Rebecca, same last name, that's my sister. She's a lawyer. I'm very happy that she's here. Rachel Wilson, Orange County Youth Bureau, looking forward to focusing on the resilience of youth. Awesome. Maria Summer, Assistant Superintendent. Amazing. So, I've worked with both these. They're amazing with College Mentors for Kids. So I'm so happy you're here too, Maria. Alexandra, also same last name. Enrique, same last name. I have some supporters here that can add to my resilience. Gabriella, Youth Service Librarian. Oh, this is amazing. Great family support, thank you. Social worker, clinical supervisor, crime victim and sexual violence center. I'm very, very grateful to be surrounded by such incredible people right now, because you all seem to be doing really incredibly important work. And I'm very honored to be able to talk to you when really I should be learning from you. So thank you again. And thank you for engaging in that practice. So I'm really glad that you got warmed up typing in the chat, because I'm about to ask you to do it again. So just to reflect before we really begin to talk about resilience in COVID times, you can pick any one of these 3 questions to answer and just expand a bit. So you can answer, what did you learn about the world that you did not know before COVID-19? What did you learn about a member of your family that you didn't know before? Or what did you learn about yourself during quarantine? So I'll give you a few moments to enter that into the chat as well. Oh, SNAP Ed New York program, amazing. That's really important for nutrition, community health worker, APC caseworker, and DV specialist. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. I'll tell you that I think I learned a lot about the world and about myself during COVID. We shut down. I was in Cornell University, and we shut down because of COVID, cutting my sophomore year short. So there was a lot of room to grow and learn in a really difficult time. So I'm looking forward to see how you all have learned and grown as well, as we see how these children have also been more resilient during this time. I'll wait a few more minutes. And again, I really appreciate your willingness to engage in this, even if it's just over Zoom. It's hard to connect, so this is really great. Rachel said, I found it enlightening to see how people handled the stressors and unknowns. Some rose to the challenges and demonstrated strengths I hadn't had the opportunity to see in them before, and unfortunately the opposite as well. Yeah, that's amazing, Rachel. I think, yeah, the unknowns brought out a lot of good and a lot of bad, but I think the kids really focused on a lot of the good, which was really awesome. Let's see. Ulika said, I learned that we were going at an unsustainable pace before the pandemic, which affected more areas than I realized. Yeah, I think, you know, as we can tell from a lot of distressed neighborhoods and a lot of people of color, the COVID pandemic brought out a lot of injustices that were already there and just highlighted them more. My father, Enrique Urquiola, said, I was disappointed to witness how politicized the treatment of something that should be science and fact-based can be, and how polarizing it could be. Yeah, it was hard to see that. And I think Vincent kind of agrees, failure in common knowledge of efficacy of vaccines, definitely. It was really hard to see the spread of different news and the polarization of this country when we should be coming together. Caitlin said, during quarantine, I learned how important community is and how important it is to support each other. Maria said, I confirmed that I am by nature a homebody and that my family that live far away are super important to me. It was easy to stay home, but hard to know that I couldn't visit even if they were sick. Yeah, these are amazing points, and I'm really grateful for you all for sharing. I think community and family, these were all things that the kids that we interviewed also felt a lot of these same kind of themes. Gabriella said, I learned how much I really enjoyed and needed being around people. Yeah, you know, I've talked to a lot of introverts who said that the pandemic was going to be amazing for them, and then realized, oh, I rely on people a lot more than I realized. So thank you guys so much again. And as you can probably guess, the reason that I chose these questions is because these were some of the questions that we posed for kids. So, you know, it's great that you all reflected, because we asked the kids to do the same kind of reflections in our interviews. So the research, Being Me in Times of Change, is the title of our research project. I would be remiss not to mention the wonderful, beautiful people I have worked with to get to this point in our research. Judy Liu graduated Cornell last year, and Una Carpenter and Abby Siegel are current juniors at Cornell. They're all amazing people, and we each brought different skills to the table in our collaboration, but we all had something in common: our passion and our compassion for youth. And Dr. Kushnir saw this in us, and she became our mentor and our leader, brought us together, and has guided our work ever since. Our team immediately knew when we were sent home in the spring of 2020 that we really wanted to know what was happening with kids. So we posed this question: how is the pandemic affecting children? What is the expertise of what is the experience of individual children, and what are the common themes in this really crazy time that we can find. So while our findings are not yet published, we have learned so much from the kids we interviewed, and we're regularly inspired by their kindness and their resilience in a time when we as college students were having trouble finding the silver lining. So our central hypothesis was that kids were going to be more resilient than people might think, and that they would present their experiences with more positivity than negativity, and we were correct. The conversations we had with kids emphasized the positive. They were constantly telling us the struggles they were facing: online school, quarantine, fear of a virus the adults around them could hardly explain. And then they would spin it, and they would always say, but it's not so bad. I have this. Or at least I get to see my family more. Or, but I've learned how to do this and this and this that I wouldn't have been able to do if not for COVID. This resilience was demonstrated in three main areas that we discussed with the kids: school and learning, social isolation, and technology. So our method was a mini longitudinal study with 2 rounds of interviews, and the study was conducted over Zoom. The interviews were recorded and saved through Zoom as well. And the responses to the interviews were then coded for reliability by multiple interviewers. We asked the kids questions about home, school, and self, with questions like these: how do you feel about being home? How do you spend most of your time? The only difference between the 2 rounds of interviews was the addition of these reflective questions in the second interview. Tell me a favorite story from this year. Tell me about someone who was important to you this year. What has been the most positive, the most negative thing this year? So what was really helpful was we had the data from the first round, and we were able to directly compare to the second round since we asked the same questions. And then we're able to add even more qualitative data to it with these additional reflective questions. So these were the participants that were interviewed. There were 28 kids in the first interview round, and 20 of them came back for the second round. The participants were all emailed and requested to participate in the study. The selection of the participants was partially determined by geographic diversity, really in an attempt to achieve greater diversity of pandemic experience. You know, a lot of states, a lot of places handled the pandemic differently. So it was interesting to hear those differing experiences from different kids. We're based in Ithaca, New York, in Cornell. So it was really important to us that we didn't just get the tri-state area, and we worked really hard to get from all over the map. So as you can see, we got Texas and California and Florida, and I don't know how, but we even got one kid from India, which was really, really awesome. So due to the nature of the study, participants without access to Zoom or an internet connection were excluded from possible participation. And I really want to highlight this as a limitation of our study because, you know, whenever I do research personally, I find it really important to try to get the voices of kids who are so often left out of the conversation and who are so often left out of research spaces, like children from distressed neighborhoods or children of color, and or children under the poverty line, for example. And a lot of times the pandemic really impacted these kids most. So if they didn't have access to technology that required Zoom, or they didn't really have good Wi-Fi, we couldn't interview them, and those kids are left out of this study. And for that, that's kind of hard to grapple with, but this study still, I'm really proud of what we have conducted, but I did not want to minimize the fact that these kids have that innate privilege in that way. And due to these limitations, the purpose of this study is not to create a generalizable result or a prediction, but rather to achieve greater connection to children and authenticity in our resulting findings. So we had 3 different categories of questions: how they learned, how they spent their time, how they felt. And we talked to them about home and family, their friends, themselves, and school. So these were some of the questions that we were asking them. So in our first interview, these are all quotes from the kids that participated. These are some of the things they missed. The pandemic and quarantine was relatively new at this point when we interviewed them, and there was a bit of an adjustment period. And you can kind of see that in their responses. They missed family, they missed traveling and simple outings, friends, school, sports, and like all of us, just normal life. So as you can see, Dave and Buster's, who would have thought that that would have been something that kids were really missing? And not having to wear a mask because this is something completely new to them. And it was definitely an adjustment. I miss all my teachers. And during this time, it wasn't just that school became virtual. There was also a period where school just completely shut down. So it was really an adjustment period for kids, and even quarantined life in general. And then 6 months later, it was kind of the same thing, normal life and just about anything in person, especially traveling and outings. And it really struck me, it always seemed to be the simplest things, like, one kid says going to the movies or even going to church. And when I was a little kid, like waking up early Sunday mornings, I don't think I would have said I miss going to church, but it was the routine, it was the structure that they were really missing. And it was sad to us to hear the plainest things be the things these kids missed most, things we've taken for granted, especially in our own childhoods. So I really want to highlight this because while these kids were really resilient, that does not take out of the equation that they were struggling and that it was a really hard time for them. And they did come around, but they definitely were missing normal life. So before we continue, are there any questions that I can answer? That's kind of like the method of our study. Maybe Yulika can just check the chat, and I'll continue.
So far, so good. Yes.
So far, so good. Great. Okay. Again, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to write in the chat. And because our data is majorly qualitative, it might be helpful to look at a couple of different experiences from our participants. So we'll start with Jane. Her name is not actually Jane, but for confidentiality, we'll call this 10-year-old from the Northeast Jane. So the first time we met Jane, we were so impressed by her eloquence. She was so excited to talk to us. And she started saying, she was like, first, I just want to start off. And we were like, okay, wow, Jane, you got this, about how happy she was to participate. She was like, I love doing studies like this. I love talking to people. So I'm so glad to be here. And she talked about living with her dad, her mom, her grandparents, and her little sister. And the first time we met with her, she said she loved school online, which was kind of a surprise to us. And she said it really actually helped her to focus, to be split into smaller groups. And she said, very surprisingly, that she actually liked spending less time with friends because she said they were bad influences on her. And when we heard this, we were like, okay, maybe that's like the parent talking. Maybe they said something inappropriate. They came home, they told their parents, and the parents were like, oh, those kids are bad influences, something like that. But, I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to speak to her a second time around, because the second time we met with her, we found out a little more about why. And Jane told us that she got bullied a lot in school, including physically, and that never happened online. There was no space for that to happen online. And she loved school. She was so inquisitive. She loved learning. She said that she loved learning about like ancient Greece and all of the different English language arts. Every single subject she had some kind of affinity towards. And there was a part of me that thought maybe this is a silver lining that we never would have considered, that, the spark that Jane had was definitely not eliminated when we talked to her, because she was able to engage in what she loved the most without the negative consequences of it. Obviously, that talks broader to how some school systems need to change, but I thought that was a really interesting thing that we would not have considered. And Jane talked about loving spending time with her family. And when we asked her who was important to her this year, she mentioned her dog, and she gets to spend more time with the dog at home. And she said she loves lunch at home because she always gets extras. She doesn't just get the one on her plate that the cafeteria monitors give her. So every day, Jane told us that she pretends to be something else to rehearse what she wants to be when she grows up. So one day she was a singer, one day she was an athlete, one day she was an astronaut. She said she wanted to practice so that when she gets to the point that she can decide a career, she'll have had the experience. So Jane was an amazing person to talk to. And the 10-year-old called herself extremely political. And she said that she started to watch the news more, and then she started really talking to her parents more about politics and the election. And I just loved Jane's passion and enthusiasm. And avoiding bullying was something we never would have considered a possible benefit of the pandemic. Now moving across the globe is Jill, an 11-year-old from India, and she lives with 8 people, including her mom, her uncle, her grandfather, and her many brothers. So she's like smack in the middle of all the brothers. And although she's from a really big family, she said a year ago, she never felt close with her family since she was very dedicated to her studies. And, you know, her friends would help her tap into her curiosity and would help with homework. And she relied more on her friends than her family, she said. And now she says she feels extremely close to them. She talked about family even being more important than her friends and wanting to give more time to them in the future. And although she misses school, she flat out said she did not like online school, but it was very difficult for her to learn. However, with that, she said whenever she's bored, she puts on a YouTube video and learns something new that way. So that was extremely resourceful of Jill to figure out how to do that instead. And the most important thing she said she learned was acceptance. And when she said that, I was like, who am I talking to right now? Like, that's incredible. And I just walked away from the interview incredulous by how mature, reflective, and resilient Jill was. And same goes towards Jane. And, you know, throughout the PowerPoint, I will give some more quotes from a bunch of different kids, and we'll continue to see some of the quotes from Jane and Jill, and you'll see how they correspond to their story a little bit too. I'd love to hear comments or reactions from you about Jane and Jill. Maybe you relate to them, maybe you felt like your kids were similar to them, maybe you had thought of bullying, maybe you hadn't. Enrique said he loves Jane. Awesome. I'm really glad that we were able to not just collect this quantitative data, that we were able to collect these stories as well, because I thought it was really important to get those individual experiences as well, to like humanize this time in history that is very difficult. How did Jill deal with not liking school online? Yeah, that's a great question. So Jill really, it was hard for her because she loved going to school. She loved seeing her classmates in person, and she loved seeing her teachers. And I think the schooling might be a little different. Again, she was from India. So she said that a lot of times her teachers would turn off their cameras and not really engage as much, would really just give them assignments. And that was really hard for her, especially someone so engaged in school. But Jill, with all of that, talked about how she still would Zoom her friends, and they would talk about some of the assignments that they did get, and they would talk more about all of those things and engage more curiously in things. And she said that her family would also help her with assignments and would help her with homework, and her brothers who had been in that place before, they all would talk together about their schooling and how it was going. So although it was really difficult for Jill, she learned a lot on her own as well, and really kind of took on a lot of agency, I think, which was amazing. Great. Again, we'll keep the chat open, but now I'll go on to our foci. So these 3 themes were our foci when examining our results, because these are things, lack of school and learning, social isolation, and lack of connection, and technology use. These were things researchers and parents tended to be most nervous about and cautious about. And they're understandably afraid that children are not learning as much because of online school. They're understandably scared of the isolation kids are facing without their friends. And lastly, they're scared that the increase in technology might mean that kids could become addicted to their screens. And I completely understand all those fears and all those worries. However, at least from our study, these don't seem to be such drastic calls for concern. Youth are really resilient, and they've found ways to connect. They've found ways to learn, and they've found ways to use technology as a resource, not as a method of addiction in a way. And I really learned that youth are forces to be reckoned with, so shouldn't underestimate them in that regard either. So our first focus is obviously, lack of school and learning. So for every question that we asked that was, have you learned this? Have you learned about the world? Have you learned about your family? Have you learned about yourself? The majority of the answers was always yes. And all of the participants, yes response rate increased from the first interview round to the second interview round, except for learning about the world. And in this case, I could see that the pandemic was something really new at first. They learned a lot about the world really quickly, and then maybe that teetered off in the re-interview round. But at the same time, as you can see, learned about the world in the second interview is still 55%. So it's still a majority of kids believe that they are learning. So although children were not able to be physically at school, they really believed that they were still learning on their own terms. And they learned about the world around them. They learned something they didn't know before. They learned something about their family, and they also learned things about themselves. So this really shows, again, the resilience of the children we surveyed. While they may not be learning as they did in a physical classroom, they are really committed to learning on a broader scale. Not only did the majority say they learned all of the above questions that we asked them, this data also proves that they were self-aware enough to recognize that they learned something. So sometimes the perception of having learned and grown is sometimes even stronger and more helpful than actually having advanced, let's say, in reading or English or things like that, you know. So this perspective on this difficult time may really help them in how they perceive the world and in facing tragedy in the future. So I really thought it showed a type of growth mindset on their part. So what did they learn? People think kids haven't been learning during this time. And while they may not be learning super traditionally as well or as much, and that online learning has definitely presented its challenges, the kids we interviewed did learn a lot. So these are some quotes from the kids. So when asked if they learned something outside of school, one kid said that they learned how to surf. Another kid said how to take care of younger siblings. One said, I think that I learned that, like, my home can actually be fun. Like, there's a lot more fun games to do. So finding the fun in a tough situation was really awesome to hear. Learning about others. So one child said, I've learned some of the cultures that are in my family. On my mom's side, I've learned some things that they do in Africa, like they do during the Christmas. They go to each store, they knock, and then they dance around in a circle and the people give them money. And I learned some things on my dad's in Mexico, that the day after, 2 days after Halloween in Mexico, they do a day that's called the Day of the Dead, where they celebrate people who have died in their family. So in this quote, you can see this participant isn't only learning about others and their family, they're also learning about themselves and their own cultural roots, which having more time with family could maybe build this deeper connection that they really ask these kinds of questions. Another quote is, I think I've learned, and this is from Jane. Jane is the very political one. She said, I think I've learned a little more about what my sister was into, that she's just like the opposite of me. We both like different things. Like, my sister doesn't like to do sports and stuff. My sister likes the shows I don't like, but at the end of the day, we both love each other. And I think that I learned that my parents, we really like to spend time together. We always watch TV together. And I guess I've learned that my parents are amazing people. I've always known that, though. So Jane just has a piece of my heart, and she's so sweet. But you really see that these kids are learning how to be more appreciative of the people who have always been around them, their family that they've had to spend more time with. And learning about the world, one kid said, I learned that you should know that life is not easy to get through these days, but that is okay. And I can try my best every day to have a good day. Some days are bad, some days are good, but mostly all the same. So, you know, as adults, sometimes we stop at, I learned that you should know that life is not easy to get through these days, full stop. But these kids always add a but. They always add something that makes them resilient. They know that they have claimed agency in a lot of these quotes. They've claimed that they can make the day good, that it's not these unstoppable forces around them. It's within themselves that they can find this strength as well. And learning about self, we got a lot of learning about self. So Jill, who's from India with all the brothers, she said, in this pandemic year, I also learned acceptance and moving on that I did not learn before. Acceptance, like things that happen and we just view our emotions, but we have to accept it and move on. That's the thing we should do for everything. Not for everything, but for some things that are ruining our emotions. So Jill here almost talks about rumination without having the vocabulary to say rumination. She talks about ruminating on kind of just bad emotions or really focusing on the negative. And she's saying, I've figured out to accept and to move on. And how many of us can say that we've done that? Like, these kids are so incredible. Another quote about the self, that I need to start paying attention to the things I have in life and the things that I don't. And I have to, when things get back to normal, I have to appreciate the trips we go on, even if they're really little trips. So appreciating the little things in life. I learned that I love to read nowadays. Yeah, nowadays I have a lot of time and I'm spending it reading, and I read so much, it's hard to keep track of what I read. So a lot of times we can overschedule kids with what we give them to do. And actually allowing them to breathe and having this free time during COVID unlocked a new love for this kid to read. I learned to be kind and careful, and we asked careful as in to wash your hands. I learned to be considerate and help others. What I love about this participant is a lot of times with kids during the pandemic, we've kind of correlated for them that being kind is taking care of yourself as well, to wear a mask, to wash your hands, that this is not only helping you, but helping the people around you. And she or he has, or they, has already made this connection in just this statement. You can tell. I've learned to be kind and careful. Washing hands is connected to this kid to being considerate and helping others. So I thought that was really great takeaway to take from COVID. And learning for the future. Jill, again, the girl from India, said, giving more time to my family so they can also give me time in the future. I think about this to move on. I think from the moving on was talking about her acceptance that she had said before, accepting and move on. So when she's in a point where she's ruminating, she thinks about the family, which is really awesome, and how that can build in her future. Jane said, well, I have learned in this time that it's a hard time right now, but what will help me in the future is being more appreciative, because I used to take things for granted. Now, maybe I'm putting Jane on a pedestal, but I don't think she ever took things for granted. I think Jane's pretty great, but it's amazing that she thinks that this is her takeaway, to be more appreciative. And one other kid said to help people when they fall. So in this time when we're so disconnected, they're still finding connection with other people. And in a time when people feel so helpless, they feel the need to help. And I think that was really amazing. So I really love sharing these quotes. And, sometimes they have the same realizations as adults. When we asked one kid, have you learned anything new at home that you would not have learned in school? They said, yes, actually, I learned that you don't actually have to wear pants during online school. So kids are really profound, but they're also really funny. Like, they were great. So I think we all learned that lesson too. So amazing. I'm really glad that we were able to share some of those things. And before we go into focus 2 of social isolation and lack of connection, are there any responses to those great quotes that we heard these tips from?
Yeah, there was one observation, and that was from Thomas, who said, interesting big jump in learning of self. Was, and then Enrique asked if there were any particular subjects that were especially more difficult, like math, which is cumulative learning.
Yeah, we asked them a lot about their school experiences, because we were curious too. There were a lot of differences across the United States, across different schools. I remember Jane, she said that they weren't learning science, that they had like 1 week of science. It was one class per week of science, and then they would switch from science to history. And that was scary to hear about, that wasn't a main focus for them. And a lot of times they kind of said that the work that they were getting was easier because it was stuff that they could look up, or teachers were trying to help kids as much as they could by not giving them like the most difficult things or the most difficult tasks or homework assignments. So I think that it was a hard year for online learning. and a lot of the kids missed it. But I think, and you'll see a little bit more too, that they did their own kind of learning a lot of times. And I remember Jane saying that she was looking at ancient civilizations for fun. Like she was just looking that up for her own knowledge. So the kids are very inquisitive, and it was not easy, and schools faced a lot of challenges, but they also found very different ways to learn. Thank you for those questions and insights. Again, please keep commenting in the chat. I love to engage with you all, and especially experiences from practitioners, what you guys have been going through too in this pandemic, especially if you work with children. Great. So our second focus is social isolation and lack of connection. So family well-being is an incredibly important and strong predictor of child well-being and resilience. Therefore, this connection and strengthening of connection in some of the participants may also help to bolster well-being during the pandemic. Let's see, awesome. So these are our findings. So while time at home definitely increased for most compared to pre-pandemic life, children felt positively about being at home. And this feeling only became more universal during the re-interview. In our interviews, children weighed the good and bad of home lockdowns. For some, the preference for virtual school was balanced by missing in-person social opportunities. And for others, a longing for in-person school, but complete satisfaction in virtual socialization was that balance. So while children seem to lean into their natural resilience and creativity in creating other social venues, as Jane pointed out to us, another hidden silver lining of being homebound was a decreased opportunity for bullying. And another key takeaway that a lot of kids said was they love being in their pajamas for school. So just the little things, I guess, that they found. So a different kind of connection with social isolation. So I think a big takeaway for us was it wasn't so much that obviously kids are physically and were physically isolated. It wasn't so much that they weren't connecting as it was a different kind of connection that they were engaging in. So from what we saw in learning, there was learning about family members during both the time of the interview and the re-interview. Additionally, time and connection with family is a really important part of building resilience, and there seemed to be a genuine connection and interaction between families. It wasn't just everyone being home and having to be together. There was also some learning about a family member during both time periods. And as you can see, there was reported learning with people at home via helping with homework. So 85% had someone help them at home with their homework the first time we interviewed, and 79% had it in the second time we interviewed. This slight decrease might be because of parents returning to work, but still it was a great majority that still had someone at home to help them. And there's an understanding about the complex idea of hanging out or time with someone. So children in our interviews, when we asked them about spending time with someone, they would always ask, does it count if it's in person, or does it have to be in person, or does it count if it's online? So I thought that really showed an acknowledgement of multiple modes of connection. So as you can see, one kid said, I wish I could go out and see friends again, but otherwise I don't really care because just before this, I was talking with them on Zoom. And when asked how much time they spent connecting with friends, one child said, well, if by with them, you mean in person with them, then a lot less time spent. But if you mean like just talking to them at all, then it's actually a lot more, because I talk to them online now and, play Minecraft with them. So again, it's just a different way to connect. And now to move on to our third focus of technology, we calculated a total of 91,505 words spoken in both of the transcripts of the interview and the re-interview. And the pandemic has had a large impact on the children in our study, and obviously technology has played a really significant part in that. And out of the 91,505 words spoken, 246 of them were online, 101 of the words was Zoom, 73 was computer, 15 was Google Meet or Google Hangout. That's like how kids are communicating online nowadays. 8 was Glitch, really emphasizing that there were still issues with Wi-Fi and online learning, and 7 was phone. So really, you've spent a considerable amount of time discussing technology in their discussion about the impact on COVID on their lives. And it's discussed so frequently because it really became children's new method of schooling, of communication, and of connection with others. So when talking about their experiences with technology, when asked about school or how they felt about school, many participants discussed the internet and technology in relation to their schooling, both in our first and second interviews. Youth complained about glitches, about Wi-Fi, and problems with online schooling, which are not to be ignored or downplayed. But we did find more positive than negative comments about the use of technology. Aside from school, kids reported learning a lot from the internet. They said they learned something new outside of the classroom via the internet. They talked about learning about themselves through technology. So they talked about getting better at the use of technology and the computer in general, a skill that they really seem to value for themselves and is being valued highly in the world today. And in talking about what would be helpful for them in the future, they also mentioned technology. Jane mentioned her own technological advances, even saying that she learned how to do Python and introductory coding. I can barely talk on the Zoom right now, but these kids are learning how to code. Like, it's incredible what they're doing. Jane also said, I also think that could help me better at computers when I'm older, because a lot of jobs require typing, and I was really bad at that before. I hated using flash drives, I hated to type, and I think it's helped me a lot. And another kid, when talking about the future and talking about future career paths, he said, I could even be something that has to do with technology because I know so much about computers now. And I most want to be like some sort of engineer, maybe a civil engineer. I barely know what a civil engineer is, by the way. I think that computers can help me understand more knowledge from even just being online. So instead of the pandemic limiting this participant's opportunities, he found a way to open himself up to his future potential, which is incredible. In terms of relationships, technology seemed to help the participants come together in a time of distance. While one participant mentioned that they miss their friends the most from before the pandemic, they also said that they can play together on the computer and it helps in communication and connection. We saw that children were saying that they'd invite friends to play online games with them, that they'd invite them for a Zoom chat or call them. And it's really offered a way for them to connect and a different and safer way to play. Unprompted, children mentioned technology when we asked about time with friends, and it really shows that technology is helpful for both connection and learning during a time of isolation and decline in education. So in terms of addiction, the kids we interviewed never really seemed to want to replace connection or time with friends with technology. They really miss being outside. They really miss going on outings and getting out of the house. If anything, I would say the pandemic has made them be resourceful in using technology as an outlet for connection. But it's also made them aware of how sick they can get of technology. A lot of them said they miss being in person with their friends. They said they are sick of being on Zoom every day, 24 hours a day. So I think they use it to be resourceful and to, again, get the silver lining of this really difficult time. But I don't super see a connection to addiction, at least with these participants. So just to conclude, we ourselves, my team and I, were so grateful that the kids felt tech savvy enough to talk with us. And it was really helpful for us that they were great with technology. And we learned so much from the youth we interviewed. They taught us the true meaning of resilience. COVID has impacted a lot of people, but I think I've perhaps felt most sympathy for children whose childhoods have seemingly been disrupted. But while they may appreciate our sympathy, I don't think that they require our pity. Kids are a lot more resilient than we may think, and they learn in seemingly unlearnable circumstances. They're faster to accept what we still hold on to, and they use the resources around them to find connection at a time of extreme isolation and loneliness. I felt this parallel to the kids as an undergrad getting involved in this study as my own way of coping with the perception of what was happening in the world. And they gave me hope, and I know my co-researchers felt the same. I think being me in times of change taught me that kids have a lot to offer us, and we should really take a moment of humility to learn from them. So thank you. I'd love to open the floor to any questions.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was really inspiring to see and to hear really what you shared there. So there was one question about how many parents were working from home during this time of the, I guess, the participants' families, caregivers.
Yeah. When we were interviewing the kids, we had that question of, are they working from home? And majority of them said yes, definitely in the first interview. In the re-interview, some parents had gone back to work, but it was definitely the majority of the parents were working from home. So it really did add more time with family during the pandemic.
Thank you. And then Enrique says, I will share that I sit on an advisory board for a K through H school. And one learning I can share is that having the children dress in their school uniforms and sticking to certain structural requirements really helped. Can you share some other commonalities among those who did best adapting to learning online?
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a little bit more the school structure. I think a lot of the kids said what they really loved was when they were able to have like almost a recess. So the school themselves with a Zoom would have a recess time for the kids where they were all able to connect. They were able to go into separate breakout rooms. They were able to play Minecraft together during the break. And that was really helpful for them because it felt a little bit more normal in that structure. I think a lot of schools also had multiple Zooms that the kids would join. And I think that breaking that up was very helpful for them too, especially like, okay, this was math class. Now I'm going to sign off and go to science class with a different teacher. Even if it was with the same teacher, it just felt like we're moving through the day and there was a little bit more of a structure around that. And I think kids really appreciated that structure a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And then you're getting some love. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. Great presentation. Thanks so much. And Susie says, love the resourcefulness of the youth that you highlighted. Yeah. And I have a question too. Do you have, did any of the participating youth have learning difficulties? Like diagnosed learning difficulties, and how did they fare?
Yeah, I think it was difficult to get that population in the survey. And I really wanted to. I know that especially for children with special needs, it's a very difficult time and it's a very challenging time for the parents of those children as well. I do know that there were children that we interviewed who had learning challenges like ADHD, not so much like autism spectrum disorder, but more of the learning disabilities. And I think what was helpful to them were their parents and their strong connections to their families who helped them. And unfortunately, we didn't interview those parents to really ask them how they were feeling during it and coping with being their children's both parent and teacher. But I think teachers really worked hard to set aside specific meetings with those youth. Jane, I know, talked about meeting with her teacher individually multiple times to talk about things that she was interested in. So teachers, and if we have any teachers here, the more flexibility that they gave and the more one-on-one time they were willing to spend with those kids, it seems like that really made a huge difference. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I heard too that, you know, some children found the environment less distracting. So, you know, that helped. Yes.
I remember Jane saying, which I thought was so funny. She was like, you know, sometimes kids in class would talk while the teacher was talking. And now they can't do that because she puts them on mute. And she was like so happy. She was like, now I get to learn uninterrupted by these kids. So for her, that was great that she really got to focus more on learning. She felt.
That's a great presentation. Well, Sophia, thank you so much. And I think you really highlighted too that, you know, while children have resilience, it doesn't mean that they weren't struggling. And I think that's really what, what we're seeing all across. And so really understanding the importance of the supportive relationships around them and an environment that, helps them, or I guess provides, the space where they can have their own insights and asks, questions and input and so forth. It seems to be, at least the participants there really have been helping them.
Yeah, and I just really want to thank everyone in this Zoom, because from what I saw before, a lot of you are practitioners and a lot of you are the connections that these kids were talking about. A lot of you are the ones who are making those Zoom calls for them and are creating different spaces for them to feel that connection during this time. And just to say that your work doesn't go unnoticed by these kids, and their resilience is not just something that comes from within, but it comes from the structures around them that many of you have put in place for them. So thank you all so much for being here and for doing such amazing work for them.
Yeah, thank you so much. This really was wonderful and insightful. I just put a link in the chat with an evaluation, or to give us an evaluation to see if you learned something, what you might have learned, and what your interests are. We welcome you, or invite you warmly to fill that out, and it won't take very long. And other than that, maybe we can all just unmute ourselves real quick and say thank you, give Sophia some love.
So
yes.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank
you, Sophia.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
I can stop the share, so if anyone wants to see some faces.
Yeah, it was so nice. Okay, where is that?